Hello, and welcome to another episode of Solipsist Watched. I'm your host, the Social Solipsist, and this week I watched Turning Red from 2022. Now, when I did my video on Encanto, I already talked a little bit about my feelings on children's animated films and animated films in general and children's films in general. And I can't remember, because I didn't listen back to the whole thing, whether or not I talked specifically about Pixar. This is a Pixar film. Pixar is now a whole subsidiary of Disney and has been for some time now. When I was younger, Pixar had a very special place in my heart, but since about I was looking at the list. I've only watched one film of theirs in the last 10 years. And that was Incredibles 2. And mostly that's because I felt that the quality of their films had diminished somewhat. Still very talented, still better than better than average generally. It seems to be the consensus, but there were just a few that I saw. I think Brave and Cars and Toy Story 3 felt like a good firm place for me to be like, yeah, I think I'm emotionally done with Pixar for the most part, or at least in the same way that I had as a kid. And nonetheless, I still like Pixar and I still wonder what they're up to. And after hearing a couple of really positive reviews about this film, not like it was a hard decision, but I decided it was one I wanted to check out. And I'm really glad I did, especially since that Lightyear thing that they made looks extremely cursed. It just looks hard on the eyes, and I don't want to know anything about it. But anyway, this movie is pretty great. I am very happy with it. It doesn't have quite the same magic as I think some of Pixar's earlier stuff does, and that's not just nostalgia. I've gone back fairly recently and rewatched a few of them, and they are still bangers. They're excellent. But this is certainly the closest thing to a return to form that I am aware of in the last 10 years. I'm very happy with this movie. I also am really happy with some of the choices and some of the, I hesitate to say leaps of faith, but some of the things that this movie was allowed to do. A lot of my concern about the Disney acquisition and the I would say related decline in Pixar's quality has been because Disney is incredibly careful and controlling of their brand. And they are very unlikely to do things that are particularly I don't want to say dangerous, but that could reflect poorly on their brand at all. This is fascinating, especially given all of the really bad business decisions and IP handling decisions they've made in the last forever. But especially when it comes to their animated stuff, they're extraordinarily careful and controlling. So this movie makes a lot of choices and talks about a lot of things and shows a lot of things that I would never have expected from a Disney film, even in the modern era, even from their Pixar subsidiary. So, what's this film about? It is about a young girl growing up in Toronto, in an Asian American Asian Canadian family, excuse me, and grappling with becoming a young adult. And I don't think it nails everything, but I'm really happy with some of the things it does nail. There are a lot of themes to unpack in this film, most of the film, while the core plot is about her this particular era of her life and growing into semi-adulthood, it is a movie that talks about a lot of heavy themes about friendship and family and emotional maturity and all these kind of heavy topics that I think could be hard for adults to grapple with, let alone children. And I think basically everything that they opt to take on as a theme, they pretty much nail. And I think they do it with a deft enough hand that only a particularly prudish or controlling parent would have any issue with how it's handled. It does raise a bunch of questions for kids, probably, but I think they're important questions. They should be. Anyway, I digress. The core metaphor, I think, to jump into some of the larger stuff here, is it's right on the cover. The thing that happens to her is that she turns into a giant red panda when she gets overly excited. And that's sort of the core of the plot. Is it's literally happening. It's not metaphorical. So what does she do about it? And I want to talk about that specifically because that depending on how you read it and depending on what you've heard, the name of the film is potentially very obviously an allusion to getting your period and menstruation, which is not something that, like, I don't think I've seen any film ever talk about it unless the film was explicitly about it or using it as some sort of gross out gag for some reason. And I think it's great because it doesn't focus on it too much, but it also doesn't shy away from it. I'm not going to explain the whole scene where they do it, but when the first time this happens to her, her mother is confused and she's trying to hide it, and it's obviously like a pretty direct metaphor for a young girl who's confused and doesn't know what's going on with her body and so on and so forth. But it becomes very quickly apparent that it is more than that. This is not just a heavy-handed metaphor for puberty, getting your period, whatever. It really spans both the spectrum of somebody of any gender hitting their puberty and having different feelings, different thoughts that they're not used to, just being a weirdo, because kids are fucking weird, and especially teenagers, once they've got all those hormones in them, are just nightmares. So it very quickly becomes apparent that this is not just a metaphor for this menstruation thing. And it's so heavy-handed in the title that I'm slightly worried that it might have scared some amount of people off of, like, oh, it's a movie about that, and I don't want to deal with that, which is shitty and not fair, but also would be a shame because this film has so much more to offer. Now, the core, this conceit, this thing of her literally turning into Red Panda is, like I said, I think a very used as a very apt, is a literal manifestation of a very apt metaphor for a bunch of different things going on in a young adult's life, including just trying to grapple with what's going on inside of them and outside of them as well, whether that's the changes to their body, the relationships they have with their friends and family, and the thoughts they have about people and stuff that's going on, and this kind of gets it very nicely merges into one of the other major themes, which is about the relationship she has with her family, and this is, I think, both specific and universal in its delivery. she appears to be like possibly first, possibly second generation immigrant from China, and her family runs a temple in Toronto, and like they are her mother is very sort of traditional in her views, and it leans on a lot of sort of questionably stereotypical but entirely reasonable things about what it's like to be have immigrant parents or immigrant grandparents who have specific expectations, social expectations as immigrants. I'm not going to delve into right now all the specifics of like what that how that breaks down, but I think this is a relationship that can be it's not just for Asian Americans, or it's not just for Asian Canadians. It's not just for Asian immigrants. It's not just for Chinese immigrants. It's not just for immigrants at all. It's for, I think, any kind of family with children who have a different viewpoint of the world than their parents, who may have had a substantial amount of experience outside of their parents' social circle, so to speak, that has given them a conflicting view of the world, and differing concerns. And so this is a very familiar thing to me about having having this conflict of interest, or not conflict of interest, but a feeling of internal conflict between the expectations of the people who are raising you, or who are your parents, and the expectations that and the pressures you feel for the world around you. I think that's true regardless of whether you have recent immigrant family, and I think it's really, really well done. It does not paint anyone as a villain. It does not paint anyone as being particularly backwards or not forward thinking. And I think that's why it is so universal in its appeal, or I think it should be universal in its appeal in that way. They could easily have done this in a much more heavy-handed and kind of ugly way, where you have repressive parents who are not supportive, who only see their own perspective, so on and so forth. And this gets into some of the issues I had a little bit with Encanto, how Encanto doesn't seem to ever really address the cores of the issue, or acknowledge that there is a shared there are shared interests, and there's a history of traumatic experience and so on and so forth that makes people behave the way they do, whether that's parents who had other controlling people in their lives, or who had extensive pressure put on them prior to having kids of their own and they never resolved their own emotional traumas. These are all themes that get unpacked, I think, really deftly. And yet it doesn't go too far. It doesn't demand, at no point even does it try and pretend that the issue is solved. There is obviously, at the end of the film, this is a kid's film and it is about family. And so unsurprisingly, at the end, things are pretty happy-go-lucky, and there's little remaining conflict. That's not really something you can do in a film aimed at kids. And so there is a bit of a polish on it, but compared to like Encanto, where I felt like they just breezed over all the problems that said, oh, grandmother understands and now it's fine, I feel like there is, both because of the nuance of the portrayal of the various adult characters versus the various kids, and the way in which the conflicts are talked out and resolved, and conflicts are maybe not resolved but nullified, or a new understanding is had between individuals. It all comes together in a very satisfying way. that doesn't feel cheap. It doesn't feel too fast. It doesn't feel unearned. Now, there are some elements of the story I don't love. The one of the core conflicts of the story. I don't think this is a spoiler at all. The story is extraordinarily simple, and you're really there for the interactions and the way that characters play off each other. The one of the core story beats is the main character May and her three friends all want to go see a boy band, and they've got parents who don't want them to, and they don't have the money to do it. And that's sort of the hook for the rest of the story. And the first 20 minutes of the film weren't quite hooking me because it was mainly playing off of it's almost exclusively set up. The first 20 minutes is this is the character, these are her parents, these are her friends, this is what she is interested in, and kids at that age are particularly single-minded about things. And none of those are really super compelling on their own, and they're not tied together yet. And especially when the core thing is like these girls want to go see a boy band, I was like, yeah, okay. It's a little bit too specific. Where a bunch of other things in the film are very not generalized, but developed in a way that they, even if you don't understand the specific thing, you can get something adjacent to it that relates to you personally. The specific, like, we want to go see a boy band and we need $800 to do it, is like, that one feels kind like a little bit too specific to find a specific or a personal relation. And so it didn't quite hook me until, after that point. So I think the beginning of the film is a little bit weaker, but it's not a problem. Overall, the production is excellent. I do have some concerns about the animation style. It's not quite my speed, and while the animation is excellent, don't get me wrong. It is using all of the classic tools that Pixar has been known for. The animations look great. They still seem to nail it better than modern Disney does, even though there's, I'm sure, a lot of cross-pollination going on. There are some elements that I don't really like. The character designs themselves are a little bit of a mix in terms of their artistic styling. I couldn't get out of my head that the style of a lot of the characters and the animations that are put on those models looked a little bit too much like Wallace and Gromit for me. And so it was slightly distracting. There's a little bit of claymation going on. There's a little bit of like blobby bodies and blobby mouths and nose and eyes and those sorts of things. But it's never super distracting. It's more on like a close-up shot where I'm just like, if you mixed up, there's a little too much that's the same in both the model and the animation that adds up to looking like the old claymation stuff. But there's ultimately nothing wrong with it. It's just not my favorite not my favorite artistic style they've done. But nonetheless, it's really excellently executed. I think they really they largely kind of ride a weird, and I want to say almost dangerous, line between heavily cartoony and heavily realistic. Obviously, none of the characters are like particularly realistic in their portrayals, and as is unsurprising in a children's film, the designs are relatively simple and specific, so that it's easy to by eye identify what character is what. But it does vary, and I think particularly it varies in the animation. There are certain characters who are very interestingly characterized by their animation style. Normally, in a lot of animated content, you see everybody's animated about the same. But the closest thing I can draw to this is that it's taking cues from certain stylistic choices in certain anime series, where animation style is deliberately changed either to characterize a particular character or to set a particular tone, where realism is either heightened or restrained, and animation frames are increased or reduced in order to impart either a more somber and, for want of a better phrase, adult tone versus a more humorous, childish, happy-go-lucky tone. And I can't think of any other like 3D animated film that I've ever seen use that effect. But there are a couple of characters and a couple of scenes with particular characters where that really stood out to me, that they're like, we're telling you who this character is in this scene, not just in the voice work and the facial expressions, but also in the manner in which the model moves. So that was kind of interesting. I could see that being more distracting or annoying to some people, if they're expecting a very consistent animation style. But I mean, I think even then, for those people, it ought to be a relatively minor thing. I would hope it wouldn't be the thing that stopped them watching this. I have it on good authority that this movie is like peak Toronto. That it is a very accurate representation of Toronto in the early 2000s. And I can't confirm that, but I do love the specificity of some of the stuff going on. It's very common, especially in since so much of film is made in the U.S., that everything is branded as the U.S., even when it's actually another country, or it's been directly adapted so that an American audience, a child audience, or just an American audience in general, isn't too weirded out by something foreign. So something as small as like the money being a different color or something like that. Like those are the kinds of things that I usually would expect to see artistically squashed. But I love the Canadian touches that I recognize, and I'm sure that somebody from Canada or from Toronto specifically is probably catching a whole bunch more than I am. I also really like what that says about the characters that are there and the setting and all these other elements. Like I said, there are a bunch of elements of this that could easily have strayed into some pretty questionable stereotypes and concerning portrayals of people of various backgrounds and faiths and things. And while I don't know Toronto very well, I grew up in an area that was fairly multicultural as well, and went to school with quite a variety of different kinds of people. And another thing that I've seen extremely rarely in any film, let alone a children's film, is portrayals of people of various backgrounds and races and faiths together in a way that is not either used for comedy or used for like some sort of, for want of a better phrase, virtue signaling. All of the portrayals in here, I think, are great, and they are not overdone, and they are not pointed out. They're just there, and very reminiscent of the sort of attitude that people in those situations would have, which is, these are the people around me. I've grown up around here. These are the people who are here. And my understanding is that the director, Domi Shi, grew up in Toronto as a Chinese Canadian immigrant child right at that time. So it makes perfect sense to me that so much of this would be very accurate. But I'm so surprised that Disney didn't try and squash that. Disney has been, in the last few years, doing a bunch more to try and have more portrayals of non-white characters and things like that, but it's been pretty questionable from time to time whether they're actually doing a good job or whether it's just sort of flag waving for the sake of, please love our corporation, we are also inclusive. This feels very honest. There are very overt depictions of, well, sorry, I don't want to say very overt. There are depictions of people of whole ton of different skin tones, whole ton of different backgrounds. Like they specifically call out that there are, they subtly call out, I have to be careful with my words here, that there are different groups of Asian people from different countries who speak different languages, and like it's not signposted. It's just like, oh, this is just these are different people. They just do different things, and it's never like, please accept us. We're showing this off, or like corporation wise. It's not please, we have shown your people, therefore please like us. I easily think it could have felt that way. And I'm just really pleased with showing this is one of the most realistic feeling depictions of a multicultural city that I've ever seen, which feels kind of pathetic to say that this is the movie that seems to be getting it so right. And also it's a kid's film, which is usually not the place where people take quote unquote risks, but it's great. And I'm just really happy for that. That's all. The cast is also very multicultural. They're not casting a bunch of like inappropriately different people for the casting, for the backgrounds. There are some big names attached to this. James Hong and Sandra Oh both have supporting roles, and they do great. No surprise there. Everybody else is great too. I don't think there's a single performance that I wasn't pleased with. And obviously it's a little bit different when you're doing voice acting, but voice acting takes a lot of specific talents as well, and can easily go very wrong. So I'm very happy with the castings as well. None of it seems to be contrived or forced. The story is simple, and the arc of it just works really well. I think it's a solid movie for kids, and I think it's a solid movie for adults too. I don't have anything specific to say about like the music. Pixar does have a history of having some pretty solid, catchy music, or at least memorable. And I don't think that I could point out anything in this one that was particularly memorable in the soundtrack. I will say that the boy band songs that they wrote and play repeatedly throughout the film do start to grate, at least for me. And that was part of why I couldn't get into the beginning of the film. Was it's like, oh, not only do you guys want to go see a boy band, we're gonna listen to you sing their songs, and we're gonna listen to the songs. Okay. And maybe I'm just too old and far away from the era when I will fully admit I not wanting to go see a boy band kind of thing, but like definitely played certain music on repeat way too much. So maybe I'm just too far away from that to have that hook me anymore. But yeah, especially boy band music from the mid 2000s has a particular a particular sound to it that grates. Otherwise, I think it's really solid all around. I'm not going to call it a return to form for Disney, but it is excellent in a way that I haven't seen in a really long time. I think the pacing is just overall excellent. I think it escalates in a way that is that feels appropriate, and the stakes are all appropriate for a kids' film as well. That's the other thing is like compared to Encanto's all over the place in terms of stakes. This one's really grounded and solid, and it knows what it's doing, and it raises the stakes and gets bombastic at the times when it's exactly appropriate. So that just really pleases me overall. Yeah, I could probably ramble some more, but anyway, thank you guys for watching another episode of Solipsist Watched. I've been the Social Solipsist, and I'll see you guys next time.